There are doorways in some bedrooms that prayers don't automatically close. I'm not talking about dreams. I'm talking about access points most believers unknowingly protect. Places where faith is spoken, but permission is silently renewed every night. You can fast, you can pray until your voice goes hoarse, you can anoint the walls, and still wonder why something keeps returning. Because the battle didn't start in the prayer, it started in the room. There are objects that don't look dangerous. They don't move, they don't speak, but they agree with something you never meant to invite. And one of them is so common, it's sitting less than 3 feet from where you sleep. Most people bought it for comfort. Some inherited it. Others were advised to keep it. No one warned them what it was trained to listen for. I know because I used to prepare rooms like this. Quietly, intentionally, without the owner ever knowing. This is not theory, this is confession. And if you feel resistance in your spirit right now, that tightening, that urge to click away, that's not fear, that's recognition. Stay with me, because once you see it, you'll understand why some answers never came, even when you prayed the right words. This is not about sin. It's not about weak faith. And it's not about forces attacking randomly. It's about permission. Permission is rarely spoken aloud. It's rarely intentional. It's established through agreement, through placement, through symbols, through patterns that repeat night after night. When I was involved on the other side, we didn't wait for people to fail morally. That was inefficient. We studied habits, sleep cycles, emotional attachments. We learned how to work around prayer, not against it. Because prayer is powerful, but agreement is legal. I watched people pray honestly and still keep the door open. Not with words, with objects, with layouts, with things placed close enough to the body to be reinforced during rest. That's why some homes feel peaceful during the day, but heavy at night. Why clarity disappears only after lying down. Why dreams repeat themes of delay, loss, or confusion. This wasn't chaos, it was structure. And once you understand that, you stop blaming yourself and start reclaiming authority you didn't know was being leased out. That's where this story has to go next. Before I became a believer, I was trained to recognize spiritual openings. Bedrooms were never ignored, they were studied carefully. Because what happens there determines what follows you during the day. We didn't start with altars and open spaces. We started where people were most unguarded. Where defenses drop, where the mind releases control, where the spirit rests without questioning. That's where access lasts the longest. I learned how certain items affect dreams, how placement influences thoughts before waking, how repeated exposure creates quiet agreement, nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. That was the point. If resistance happened during prayer time, we waited. Night would do the work for us. By morning, the person would wake up tired without reason, heavy without explanation, delayed without knowing why. And they would blame themselves. They'd pray harder, fast longer. Never realizing the conflict wasn't in their devotion, it was in their environment. That training is why I speak carefully now. Because once you understand how openings are maintained, you stop fighting shadows and start closing what was never meant to stay open. The first time I saw this used, it delayed a woman's answers for months. She wasn't rebellious. She wasn't careless. She prayed every morning before dawn. She kept journals filled with scriptures. Her walls were anointed. Her church knew her as consistent. But every prayer stopped short of response. Each time she prayed, she felt heard, yet nothing shifted. What she didn't know, what no one told her, was that her bedroom had been trained to interrupt. I was there when it was done. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. No candles, no chanting. Just placement, timing, agreement. That object didn't attack her prayers. It delayed them. And delay is enough when time is the weapon. The second time, it didn't touch prayer first. It touched strength. A man began waking up tired, no matter how long he slept. He prayed, then stopped halfway, distracted by heaviness. He tried fasting. His body resisted. Scriptures felt distant. He blamed work, stress, age. But the exhaustion wasn't physical. It was spiritual pressure pressing from the place he was meant to rest. The bedroom was doing its job. Because rest is not neutral. The third time, it was a pastor, a man who preached deliverance. A man who laid hands on others and watched things break. He never suspected his own bedroom. He assumed authority covered everything. But authority ignored spaces authority constantly resisted. His sermons were powerful. His altar calls were real. But at night, his mind battled confusion. His prayers shortened. His clarity dimmed. And the object was never questioned, because it had always been there. This is where most people misunderstand warfare. They think attack comes from outside, but access is usually invited quietly and then maintained daily. Before I explain how this works, before I name what opens these doors, you need to understand why bedrooms matter spiritually. Why that room carries more influence than your living room. Why what is placed near your bed speaks longer than what you pray before sleep. Because once you understand the role of the bedroom, you'll stop asking why answers are delayed, and start asking what has been allowed to speak while you rest. The bedroom is not just a room. It is where defenses are lowered without permission being asked. It is where the body rests, where the mind releases control, where the spirit becomes open, not by intention, but by design. That's why covenants are strengthened there. That's why dreams visit there. That's why clarity and confusion both compete for access there. I learned early that you don't fight a believer first in public spaces. You don't need to. You wait until night. Because what you allow near your rest decides how much resistance you carry when you wake. When I was involved in these practices, we were taught something very specific. Never attack where someone is alert. Target where they feel safe. Target where they undress the armor without thinking. That is why many people wake up tired even after sleeping. Why irritation appears before breakfast. Why doubt enters before logic has time to respond. The battle didn't start that morning. It crossed a boundary hours earlier. There is a principle woven through Scripture that most people read past. Gates matter. Who watches matters. What is allowed to stand near rest determines what is allowed to travel through dreams, thoughts, and emotions. I'm not preaching. I'm revealing a pattern. In ancient understanding, rest was guarded. Sleep was watched. Night was not ignored. Because night decides momentum. This is why attacks often begin when the lights go off, but show themselves after sunrise. You call it mood changes, sudden heaviness, arguments with no clear source, prayer feeling harder than usual. But the seed was planted while you slept. I've stood in rooms where nothing looked wrong, but everything had been positioned. Not to scare, not to harm physically, to weaken watchfulness, to reduce awareness, to make spiritual resistance feel exhausting, and the person sleeping there had no idea why their days felt uphill. This is the part that took me years to admit. Many of the people affected were sincere believers. They loved God. That didn't stop access, because access was never about belief. It was about agreement through proximity. If this is already explaining something you've been experiencing, the timing of attacks, the heaviness that lifts as the day goes on, type I see it, not for me, for yourself. Because once you recognize the territory, you stop blaming your faith, and you start reclaiming your ground. We used objects that had emotional or ritual history. Not everything old is harmless. Not everything gifted is clean. Some items don't function because of how they look. They function because of what they remember. When I was involved, we didn't need to touch the person. We didn't need to speak to them. We didn't need permission from their mouth. We needed agreement from their space. And history creates agreement. There was a believer I remember clearly. Strong faith, disciplined fasting, consistent prayer. During the day, they were fine. But night after night, the same pattern. Heaviness after midnight, sudden wakefulness, prayers feeling blocked halfway through the sentence. Nothing dramatic, just resistance. That's how you miss it. They thought it was exhaustion. They thought it was stress. But there was fear they couldn't explain. Not panic, not terror. Just a sense of being watched, without eyes. That fear didn't come from imagination. It came from exposure. They prayed harder, added more hours, increased fasting, anointed doors, anointed windows, and still, the room felt heavy. Because prayers spoken inside an agreed space don't cancel the agreement. They collide with it. One night, out of frustration, they began cleaning, not spiritually, physically. They picked up an old object near the bed, a gift, passed down, carried through multiple homes. It wasn't ugly, it wasn't strange, but it had a story. And stories matter. They felt resistance the moment they touched it. Not emotion, opposition. That's when they knew the problem wasn't prayer. It was placement. They removed it from the room, not with a ritual, not with fear, just obedience. That night, they slept. No interruption, no pressure. The next morning, prayer flowed, not louder, not longer, clear. Peace returned, not forced, not emotional, restored. That object had been doing one thing, keeping a door open through memory. And once it was gone, the room changed. But listen carefully. That was the least aggressive one, because the next category doesn't rely on history alone, it relies on imitation, and it's far more common than people realize. Let me say this carefully. Some doors don't open because of words. They open because of what the eyes return to. Images create focus. Focus creates meditation. And meditation, whether intentional or accidental, creates permission. This is where many sincere believers lose ground without ever knowing when it happened. I learned this early. In the work I was involved in before my conversion, we didn't always need rituals. Sometimes we just needed repetition. An image placed where the eyes rest, something seen last at night, something seen first in the morning. It didn't have to look evil. It just had to carry agreement. I remember one room clearly. A praying woman, fasting often, scriptures on her lips, but above her bed was an image she thought was harmless. She said it made her feel calm. What she didn't know is calm is the doorway. That image became the focus point, night after night, and then the dreams started. Always the same pattern. She would wake suddenly, heart racing, feeling watched. No clear figure, no voice, just pressure. She began to fear sleeping, and slowly her prayers felt delayed, not denied, delayed. That delay wasn't accidental. The image had become a visual agreement. It trained her mind where to rest, and whatever holds your focus long enough eventually receives access. I didn't know her personally, but I knew the structure, because I had helped set up others like it. This is confession. When she finally removed the image, she didn't even pray first. She just took it down. That night, no dream. The next night, rest. The fear lifted without effort. And within weeks, answers she had been waiting on began to move. Peace returned before explanations did. That's how you know it was real. When the atmosphere changes before circumstances do. If you're still following closely, if something is already coming to mind right now, comment fire. Because what you see repeatedly, you eventually agree with. An agreement is how access is sustained. Most people watching this are not under attack. They are exposed, and exposure doesn't feel violent until it accumulates. That's why many believers dismiss it. There's no nightmare, no sudden collapse, no obvious disturbance. Just fatigue that doesn't lift, focus that slips during prayer, a heaviness that settles after midnight. That is how it works. When I was inside, we didn't rush destruction. We waited. Because exposure does the work for us. You don't break into a house whose door is already open. You just keep returning. I remember the first time I understood this clearly. We were taught that resistance brings attention, but familiarity brings permission. So we learned to mark rooms, not people. Bedrooms especially. Because sleep lowers defenses, words cannot. Most prayer warriors argue about power, about authority, about which prayer is stronger. But very few ask the real question. What in this room still agrees with the old access? That's why the next portal causes arguments. Because it doesn't look dark. It looks useful, personal, even spiritual. I've watched believers defend it passionately. Anoint everything else but refuse to move this one thing. And every time they did, the room remained accessible. This portal doesn't attack your faith. It outlasts it. We were instructed never to touch it, only to rely on it, because as long as it stayed, we didn't need to return. The room would keep itself open. I'm telling you this because I helped enforce that rule. I knew which rooms would struggle longer, not by how loud the prayers were, but by what stayed beside the bed. And if you're feeling unsettled right now, it's not because something is happening to you. It's because something is being revealed. The next portal is the one most prayer warriors argue about. And once I name it, you'll understand why exposure can survive fasting. There's a moment every night when resistance is lowest. It's not during prayer, it's not during worship. It's when your body is tired and your guard quietly steps aside. What you say before sleep matters, because words spoken in exhaustion carry more weight than words spoken in strength. What you watch before sleep matters, because images don't need permission when the mind is open. What you tolerate while tired matters, because tolerance becomes agreement when discernment is asleep. This is where many spiritually strong people lose ground. Not because they stopped believing, but because they stopped guarding. I've seen it again and again. People with authority during the day reduced to confusion at night. They prayed powerfully, they fasted seriously, but they collapsed into bed without closing the day. I remember one person clearly, disciplined, committed, feared by opposition, but mentally exhausted. They would lie down and say things like, "I'm too tired to fight today. Tomorrow I'll deal with this. I just want peace." They didn't know those words were not neutral. They sounded harmless, but they were permissions. And then the dreams started. Not obvious, not dramatic, just repetition, pressure, delay. They woke up feeling drained, yet couldn't explain why. They thought it was stress. It wasn't. I used to listen for that moment. That moment when discipline ended and fatigue spoke. Because whatever is agreed to before sleep is treated as consent. Sleep is not empty. It's a transfer point. The turning point came when closure became intentional. Not emotional, not loud, intentional. They stopped falling asleep distracted. They stopped ending the day unfinished. They began closing doors verbally. Simple words, clear words. I withdraw permission. I cancel every agreement made in weakness. This mind and body rest under authority. They replaced exhaustion statements with declarations, and something shifted. The dreams stopped, the heaviness lifted, the authority returned. Not because they fought harder, but because they stopped agreeing quietly. This is the portal many never suspect, because it hides in routine. And tonight, some of you recognized it. That moment when you lie down and surrender without realizing it. If this connects with your life, if you felt strong by day and drained by night, type "I receive" in the comments. Not for me, for closure. Prayer is powerful. I will never deny that. I have seen prayer interrupt timelines. I have seen prayer dismantle assignments that were already in motion. But prayer does not replace wisdom. And this is where many sincere people get confused. You can be praying correctly, with a pure heart, with faith, and still be standing inside an open gate. Prayer sends authority outward, but wisdom checks what is still allowed inward. In the work I used to do, we counted on this misunderstanding. Not because prayer was weak, but because access was still intact. We were never taught to fight prayer. We were taught to wait it out, to let it rise, hit resistance, and exhaust the person praying. Because as long as the doorway stayed open, the prayer had to keep returning to the same issue. That's why some of you feel like you're always starting over. You break through, then something pulls you back. You feel peace. Then the pressure returns. It's not because your prayer failed. It's because prayer was working, but wisdom hadn't entered the room yet. I remember preparing a space once, nothing dramatic, nothing that would alarm the owner. No symbols on walls caught, no chants spoken aloud. Just placement, alignment, agreement. They prayed in that room every night, and every night the same struggle returned. Not stronger, just persistent. That's how it works. Opposition doesn't always come to overpower you. Sometimes it only comes to stay. And prayer alone does not evict what was given permission. This is why some people pray harder when they should be looking closer. Why they fast longer when they should be examining what shares space with them. Why they rebuke when they should be closing. I'm saying this carefully because this is not about fear. This is about clarity. Nothing can remain where it has no access. But many people never remove access because no one ever told them it was there. I didn't know this as a believer at first. I prayed too, and I wondered why certain patterns delayed their release until I recognized the same structures I used to build. That moment changed everything. Because once you close what is open, prayer doesn't struggle, it moves. So how do you close what you didn't know was open? That's what I'm about to show you. War doesn't begin with shouting, it begins with seeing. For years, people came to me saying the same thing. I pray, but my nights are heavy. I wake up tired. I feel watched, pressed, distracted. And I knew exactly why. Because warfare hides best in familiarity. The first step is not fear, it's honesty. Ask yourself, without panic, without guilt, what has constant access to my rest? Scripture says, be alert, not anxious, alert. Awareness removes ignorance, and ignorance is where permission survives. When I left that life, this was the first thing I had to do, admit what I had allowed near my rest. Once you see it, don't negotiate with it. This is not about destroying everything you own, it's about removing agreement. In the past, we counted on hesitation, we counted on sentiment, we counted on delay. But Scripture is clear, have nothing to do with the works of darkness. Removal is an act of obedience, not emotion. If something was linked to fear, control, seduction, obsession, or false comfort, it doesn't belong where your body is meant to recover. When I removed certain items from my own space, the atmosphere didn't argue, it lifted. This is where most people stop too early. Taking something away without closing the door leaves the room vulnerable. Renouncement is verbal, clear, simple. You say it out loud. I withdraw permission from anything that entered my space without God's authority. I reject every agreement made knowingly or unknowingly. Scripture says, life and death are in the power of the tongue, so speak with calm authority. No shouting, no performance. When I did this, I felt resistance, not in the room, but in my thoughts. That's how you know the agreement was real. Nature hates a vacuum, so does the spiritual realm. You don't just remove and renounce, you realign. You dedicate the space back to its original purpose: rest, peace, clarity. Say it plainly, this room belongs to God, my sleep belongs to God. Scripture says, He gives His beloved rest. When I realigned my space, my dreams changed first, then my mornings, then my strength. That's how order returns, quietly. This is the part many people don't trust. They think rest means vulnerability. But Scripture says, He who watches over you neither sleeps nor slumbers. Rest is not surrender to darkness, it's surrender to protection. After I walked this out, the night stopped being a battlefield. No fear, no striving. Just rest. If this is speaking to you, if you know someone who struggles at night, wakes suddenly, or avoids sleep, share this with them. Not to scare them, to free them. I want to tell you what happened after. Because exposure without restoration would be cruel. There was a night when I removed what had been permitted in my own room. No shouting, no drama, no rituals. Just truth and authority reclaimed. I didn't feel chills. I didn't hear noises. What I felt was space. Clarity returned first. My prayers stopped hitting resistance. Not louder, clearer. I would speak a sentence and feel it land. My sleep changed. No heaviness when I woke. No weight pressing on my chest. For the first time in years, rest felt guarded. Peace wasn't emotional, it was structural. And fear? Fear left quietly. It didn't fight to stay, because fear only survives where access exists. When access was removed, authority stood. This is why I can speak calmly now, because I've lived on both sides. I've prepared rooms to weaken people, and I've watched those same rooms become places of strength. This is not about obsession. This is about alignment. If you're listening and realizing something has been off, but I couldn't name it, that awareness is not condemnation. It's invitation. You are not under attack because you are weak. You are targeted because you are meant to be effective. And the moment you correct agreement, everything else falls back into order. No fear, no confusion, just authority, and peace that stays. Knowing this is not enough, I need you to hear that clearly. Awareness alone does not revoke permission. When I was on the other side, we counted on awareness without action. People would sense something was wrong, talk about it, pray around it, and then leave the structure untouched. That was enough. Because access doesn't need belief. It only needs agreement. Sometimes the agreement is old, sometimes it was never yours to begin with. Handed down, gifted, placed. I watched people cry in prayer while the doorway stayed open. Not because God was silent, but because order matters in the unseen. You don't negotiate with a door, you close it. I'm saying this now because some of you are already replaying your room in your mind. You're remembering what you never questioned. That feeling you have right now, that quiet urgency, that's not accusation, That's mercy. Ignore this, and nothing changes. Time does not weaken what feeds on access. And comfort is not the same as safety. In the next video, I'll expose how believers permanently seal spiritual doors, without fear, without obsession, without turning their lives into rituals. I'll show you what actually removes access and what only makes noise. Because once a door is sealed correctly, the room changes, sleep changes, prayer changes, and the struggle you thought was spiritual warfare finally ends. Stay ready. Some doors close tonight, others require understanding first. I didn't share this to frighten you. I shared it because silence is how these things survive. For years, I knew exactly what to place, where to place it, and how long it would take before frustration showed up in someone's prayer life. I watched people blame themselves, blame their faith, blame God, all while the agreement stayed untouched. When I left that life, exposure was not optional. It was the cost of freedom. That's why I speak now, slowly, carefully, truthfully. If this opened your eyes even a little, like this video so others don't stay unaware. Not for popularity, not for numbers, but because someone else is praying tonight in a room that needs attention. Subscribe because exposure brings freedom. This channel exists for those who sense something is off but couldn't name it. You're not weak, you're not abandoned. You were just fighting without full information. And remember, light doesn't panic, it reveals.